Good morning. My name is Jack McCune, and I have the privilege of introducing our next speaker. Jennifer McCune is a certified public accountant, a college accounting instructor, and the founder of Comet CLASS and Comet Leadership Academy, a leadership program that I've been fortunate to be a part of as a student here at Western Iowa Tech. She's an award-winning educator, a dedicated mentor, and someone who believes deeply in the power of connection. She is also my mom, which makes this introduction extra meaningful for me. I've had a front row seat to her commitment to connection, leadership, and probably more spreadsheets than most people grow up around. When I found out that she was going to share a story about my younger brother, Danny, I figured I'd better one-up him and be the person who introduces her. So here I am. It's an honor to introduce someone who inspires me every day to lead with purpose and empathy. Please join me in welcoming my mom, Jennifer McCune.
Everywhere we look, schools, workplaces, neighborhoods, people feel disconnected. Isolation is becoming the norm. But we have a quiet power that can reverse it: empathy. It's what connects us to one another even when our stories are not the same. It moves us to care, it moves us to connect, and it moves us to act. Today, I want to share how empathy leaves an invisible signature and how it can spark the kind of transformation that will help us build stronger, more compassionate communities. And I want to start by telling a story. And this is a story that changed everything for me. This is a story about how empathy saved my son Danny's life before he even took his first breath. So it all started at a routine prenatal appointment where my doctor had to leave to go deliver a baby unexpectedly. I grabbed a magazine to pass the time, and there I came across an article that talked about how reduced fetal movement could be an indicator of fetal distress. It recommended that women in their third trimester of pregnancy count their baby's kicks, and if they noticed that patterns were changing, to contact their doctor immediately. It planted a quiet but urgent seed, one of those that roots itself in the back of your head and urges you to listen even when you want to ignore it. So a few weeks later, when I was doing my daily kick count, I noticed it. He wasn't moving like he usually did, and I almost didn't call. I knew I had a doctor appointment the next day, and I didn't want to bother the doctor at that time of evening. But then I remembered that article. So I called my doctor expecting to get reassurance, and instead she encouraged me to come in immediately. After a prompt evaluation, they said they needed to proceed with an emergency delivery. And I responded as any rational new mom would, "Well, my house is not clean yet." I thought I had a few more weeks, but upon delivery, they discovered that the umbilical cord was wrapped tightly around Danny's neck 4 times. It was as if life itself was holding its breath. The doctor later told me if I hadn't come in when I did, we would have had a different outcome than his healthy birth. A different outcome. All because of a tool that I just learned about, kick counting. My son's life was saved. And that tool was promoted by 5 Iowa women. And these women are absolute warriors. So they each endured the unbearable pain of losing a child to stillbirth. And after learning about public research in Norway that showed that tracking a baby's fetal movement could reduce stillbirths, they saw a path forward. They could have turned inward, but they chose to be advocates, acting not just for themselves, but for families that they had never even met. So they launched Count the Kicks, which is an evidence-based campaign to empower expectant parents with knowledge and a tool to monitor their baby's well-being and to advocate for themselves. So their empathy became a movement. They turned their grief into protection for thousands of families. And their courage didn't just raise awareness. It reached a magazine that ended up in my hands at the moment that I needed it the most. So it turned out that Danny was the very first baby to be saved by Count the Kicks. And he is now 17 years old, and he pushes every single button that I have. But he also makes me laugh until I cry, and he surprises me with his quiet kindness. And every moment is just an ordinary moment that might not have happened. It could have been lost before it began. So Danny's story is one of proactive empathy, where action saved a life. But empathy isn't always that straightforward. It can be a struggle to relate to challenges that we haven't experienced. And that's where empathy gap comes in. And one way that we've bridged that gap for centuries has been through storytelling. It's been through theater and literature and art. So just last year, my kids were able to perform in their school musical, Les Miserables, which was a very proud mom moment. And as I watched them on stage, sharing stories of injustice and heartbreak and redemption, it reminded me that stories invite us into someone else's world. And while our circumstances might be different, our hopes and our fears and our desire to be seen, that's shared. And that's where empathy begins. It's in that shared humanity. So from Atticus Finch in To Kill a Mockingbird, who chose justice over popularity, or Katniss Everdeen in The Hunger Games, who chose to volunteer her life to protect her sister, or even in the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, who discovered the art that he always had, the heart that he always had, stories help us feel what others feel. They push us to act, and they plant those seeds of advocacy. Now, sometimes these stories can feel distant, right? These are things that happen to other people. They don't happen to us. We applaud from the safety of our seats, and we forget that these stories echo off stage too, in those choices that we make every day. So in art, we have the opportunity to rehearse empathy. But do we act any differently after that final scene? So let me give you a modern example. A menstrual cramp simulator, right? So this was designed to help men understand the physical pain of severe cramps. I first heard about this on a podcast where a woman was explaining that it was created to make invisible pain visible. And she related to this because she felt like her pain had been dismissed for years. So women often bring their partners to try this simulator, not out of cruelty necessarily, but for some acknowledgement, right? So when women would get hooked up to the simulator, they would often remain stoic, but often when the men got hooked up to the simulator, they would writhe in pain, which would then prompt light heckling from their partners. Do you think you could cook dinner with cramps like that? No, I didn't think so. One husband who once accused his wife of exaggerating was now stunned. He was wondering why she didn't make a bigger deal of the pain that she was enduring. And she didn't expect him to fix it. She just wanted him to believe her. But imagine that empathy turned into more. If he started sharing household responsibilities or advocating for her in a medical setting, or even just checking on her to make sure she was doing okay. That's the shift, right? So that's when understanding becomes action. And empathy doesn't always have to require these dramatic examples or these high-tech tools. Sometimes it just begins by simply noticing the quiet signals that people are sending us every day. So as the coordinator of our campus student leadership group, I've had the opportunity to see how empathy can spark real change. Over lunch one day, a student casually mentioned how nice it was to be eating with others. She said that when she first came to college, she frequently ate alone in her car because she hadn't made any friends yet. So it seemed like a passing comment, but it really unveiled that quiet ache of isolation, where you have your hands up to the glass of a full room and you can see that connection, but you can't quite get in there. She was not alone, right? Loneliness is an epidemic that is affecting many young people today, and our college campuses are no exception. So our student leaders not only heard her, they responded. So they started creating monthly events that were focused on food and connection. So the very first event they came up with, we titled, "What's Your Jam?" And this is where they served grilled peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and talked about shared interests. The next one was Ramen Rave. So this is where a hot meal made by our very own culinary students was enjoyed with laughter and friendship. So when this started, we didn't have data. We just had empathy. But since then, the World Happiness Report confirmed what we already believed to be true, and that's that shared meals help contribute to happiness and connection. So they took it one step further and just yesterday hosted Pizza with the President. So that was inviting students who maybe once felt like outsiders to now sit with campus leadership. So previously they felt invisible, but now they had a seat at the table and they knew that their voice mattered. So that one casual comment from a student became a catalyst. So students who once sat alone began stepping into community because empathy in action creates belonging. It reminds people that they matter. So empathy doesn't have to always have a grand gesture, right? Sometimes it can be a quiet advocacy. It's simply noticing who needs to be seen and making room for them. So it's the student who shifts over and says, "Hey, come sit with me." Or the mentor that sends a text that says, "I am so proud of you." Or the friend that says, "You've got this." There's no stage, right? There's no spotlight. It's just a deep commitment to serving and caring for others. The most powerful leaders that I've ever known in my life were not the loudest in the room. They were the ones that led with their heart. They are the ones who chose empathy, and that left an invisible signature. They didn't chase status. They didn't chase privilege. They didn't chase ego. They simply wanted to change lives with no expectation of recognition. Advocacy gives empathy a voice, but that voice does not always roar, right? Sometimes it whispers, but it's steady and it endures and it reminds us who we stand beside. So some are still going to question empathy's role, right? They're going to believe that detachment makes us stronger. But without empathy, compassion becomes cold. It's when it's rooted in wisdom that empathy will no longer cloud our judgment. It's going to fuel our courage to act. That's what's going to reshape communities in the ways that truly matter. So empathy is going to shift us from walking past one another to walking with one another. And it's going to remind us that we are more alike than we are different, and that simple truth means everything. It saved my son Danny's life. It shaped spaces on our community where students now can feel seen. It will turn strangers into allies and communities into families. But empathy without action is a spark that's never given oxygen. So let it move you, right? Let it drive you to advocate for those who are unseen and unheard and are waiting quietly on the sidelines. Feel deeply, but act boldly. And that's how empathy will become a revolution. Thank you.